Night is coming. High time to take your tea and sit down to TV or to the good book and read something horror, something thrilling, something that sets chills down your spine. And that's what I want us to do in this kind of video. Some authors, especially those who write stories, engaging, well, they are all like that, but horror stories, thrilling stories, stories that provoke your emotions. In their library, you can find really tiny stories, but that these ones hit you straight in the face. And in these videos, like that, we are going to read short stories of my choice, and well, share our thoughts about that. For this evening, I decided to take the really tiny story of one of my favorite authors. It is Lovecraft. And now we go to page 123. Look, this story is literally 3 pages. 3. My choice is to read first and then discuss, because otherwise it will look like, reading forward that may spoil the contents of the masterpiece and provide you with some unnecessary information about the author and stuff like that. So, read first, discuss then, okay? Nyarlathotep. Nyarlathotep, the crawling chaos. I am the last. I will tell the audient void. I do not recall distinctly when it began, but it was months ago. The general tension was horrible. To a season of political and social upheaval was added a strange and brooding apprehension of hideous physical danger. A danger widespread and all-embracing, such a danger as may be imagined only in the most terrible phantasms of night. I recall that the people went about with pale and worried faces, and whispered warnings and prophecies which no one dared consciously repeat or acknowledge to himself that he had heard. A sense of monstrous guilt was upon the land, and out of the abysses between the stars swept chill currents that made men shiver in dark and lonely places. There was a demoniac alteration in the sequence of seasons. The autumn heat lingered fearsomely, and everyone felt that the world and perhaps the universe had passed from the control of known gods or forces to that of gods and forces which were unknown. And it was then Nyarlathotep came out of Egypt. Who he was, no one would tell, but he was of the old native blood and looked like a pharaoh. The Falahim knelt when they saw him, yet could not say why. He said he has risen up out of the blackness of 27 centuries, and that he had heard messages from places not on his planet. Into the lands of civilization came Nyarlathotep, swarthy, slender, and sinister, always buying strange instruments of glass and metal and combining them into instruments yet stranger. He spoke much of the sciences, of electricity and psychology, and gave exhibitions of power which sent his spectators away speechless, yet which swelled his fame of exceeding magnitude. Men advised one another to see Nyarlathotep and shuddered. And when Nyarlathotep went, rest vanished. For the small hours were rent with the screams of nightmare. Never before had the screams of nightmare been such a public problem. Now the wise men Now the wise men almost wished they could forbid sleep in the small hours, that the strikes of cities might less horribly disturb the pale, pitying moon as it glimmered on green waters gliding under the bridges, and old steeples crumbling against the sickly sky. I remember when Nyarlathotep came into my city, the great, the old, the terrible city of unnumbered crimes. My friend had told me of him, and of the impelling fascination and allurement of his revelation, and I burned with my eagerness to explore his uttermost mysteries. My friend said that they were horrible and impressive beyond my most fevered imaginings, and was thrown on a screen in the darkened room prophesied things none but Nyarlathotep dared prophesy. And in the sputter of the sparks there was taken from men that which had never been taken before yet, which shewed only in the eyes. And I heard it hinted abroad, and those who knew Nyarlathotep looked on sights which others saw not. It was in the hot autumn that I went through the night with the restless crowds to see Nyarlathotep. Through the stifling night and up the endless stairs into the choking room, and shallowed on the screen. I saw hooded forms amidst ruins, and yellow evil faces peering from behind fallen monuments, and I saw the world battling against blackness, against the waves of destruction from ultimate space, whirling, churning, struggling around the dimming, cooling sun. Then the sparks played amazingly around the heads of the spectators. The hair stood up on end, whilst shadows, more grotesque than I can tell, came out and squatted on the heads. And when I, who was colder and more scientific than the rest, mumbled a trembling protest about imposture and static electricity, Nyarlathotep drew us all out, down the dizzy stairs into the damp, hot, deserted midnight streets. I screamed aloud that I was not afraid, that I never could be afraid, and others screamed with me for solace. We swore to one another that the city was exactly the same and still alive, and when the electric lights began to fade, we cursed the company over and over again and laughed at the queer faces we made. I believe we felt something coming down from the greenish moon, for when we began to depend on its light, we drifted into curious involuntary marching formations, and seemed to know our destination though we dare not think of them. Once we looked at the pavement and found the blocks loose and displaced by grass, with scarce a line of rusted metal to shew where the tramways had run. And again we saw a tram car, lone, windowless, dilapidated, and almost on its side. When we gazed around the horizon, we could not find the third tower by the river, and noticed that the silhouette of the second tower was ragged at the top. Then we split into narrow columns, each of which seemed drawn in a different direction. One disappeared in a narrow alley to the left, leaving only the echo of a shocking moan. Another filed down a weed-choked subway entrance, howling with a laughter that was mad. My own column was sucked toward the open country, and presently I felt a chill, which was not of the hot autumn, for as we stalked out on the dark moor, we beheld around us the hellish moon glitter of evil snows. Trackless, inexplicable snows, swept asunder in one direction only, where lay a gulf all the blacker for its glittering walls. The column seemed very thin indeed, as it plodded dreamily into the gulf. I lingered behind, for the black rift in the green-litten snow was frightful, and I thought I had heard the reverberations of disquieting wail as my companions vanished. But my power to linger was slight, as if beckoned by those who had gone before. I half floated between the titanic snowdrifts, quivering and afraid, into sightless vortex of the unimaginable. Screamingly sentient, dumbly delirious, only the gods that were can tell. A sickened, sensitive shadow writhing in hands that are not hands, and weird blindly past ghastly midnights of rotting creation, corpses of dead worlds with sores that were cities, charnel winds that brush the pallid stars and make them flicker low. Below, beyond the worlds, vague ghosts of monstrous things, half-seen columns on unsanctified temples that rest on nameless rocks beneath space, and reach up to dizzy vacua above the spheres of light and darkness. And through this revolting graveyard of the universe, the muffled, maddening beating of drums and thin, monotonous whine of blasphemous flutes from inconceivable, unlighted chambers beyond time, the detestable pounding and piping whereon to dance slowly, awkwardly, and absurdly the gigantic, tenebrous, ultimate gods, the blind, voiceless, mindless gargoyles, whose soul is Nyarlathotep. Why him? Why this story? Well, first of all, Howard Lovecraft is an extremely popular writer. Well, I cannot say extremely, but people who are into horror stories know him as well as Edgar Allan Poe, Stephen King, Clive Barker, and others. Insanity was a subject of many of his stories and one of his main fears, actually, along with fear of water, but it was not presented in the story, in this story. And why this story? It is, first of all, really tiny. That is number one. Number two, it has got a twist that stunned me when reading. And also, this story is really different from the others that he wrote. I've read a lot. It is really different from the others, but it carries all the same peculiarities of his style. If you're interested in reading Lovecraft stories, I think you should be ready for some of his peculiar things. And in the piece that we have heard, they are all presented very, very well. Just look. First of all, the narrator. I don't know if in any of the short stories, you will hear the author's voice. No, they are all stories of the narrator. And he tells the story to, well, you as the person he talks with, or leaves the death note to, or leaves a diary to. It is a rare story that of Lovecraft that hasn't got the narrator. Usually it is the person who happened to get into a really tough situation and walk away. Well, the fact that he's telling the story means that he has been saved, or he has saved himself. Well, that's a bit of disappointment sometimes. That we know that the main character has survived, and that knowledge sometimes saves us some piece of drama. Okay, second, the narrator. One peculiar thing about narrator is that he's a well-educated person. Most of the times he's a scientist, a scientific person, a rational person that doesn't believe all that crap about magic and stuff, and, well, gradually gets very much surprised. But most of the story really wouldn't have happened if his self-preservation instinct was just stronger than his scientific curiosity. Number 3. This peculiarity goes just right from the previous one. The narrator is a well-educated person. He's a scientist. He's not just the guy. And that's why most of the times, well, I think like 100% of the times, there are lots of high-flown speech. The speech is really very, very sometimes too complex, too, I don't know, say scientific. And point number 4 goes along with that one. Be prepared to meet some of the adjectives and adverbs which you see for the first time in your life, and I think for the last. Because I have found there some words that I really haven't thought of existed, and I guess there were really high-flown synonyms of the well-known adjectives or adverbs describing some events, because these events happen to be really extraordinary. Maybe that's why I now need a dictionary to dig into to understand how much extraordinary were these events. And as a finish of my video, I would like to ask you, the person who viewed this piece of mine, what do you think about this short story? And as long as not many people watch me, I would really, really love to hear at least any feedback on that. Thank you. Bye.